Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to completely demystify the core building blocks of the web. If you've ever looked at a really beautifully designed web page and wondered, how exactly was this constructed from the ground up? Well, you are definitely in the right place. We're stripping away all the mystery right now and looking at the raw materials that literally make the internet tick: HTML and CSS. So, here's our roadmap for the Explainer today. 1. Web skeleton, HTML basics. 2. Styling the web, CSS rules. 3. Fonts and backgrounds in design. 4. Writing code smartly and professionally. And finally, 5. Mastering element layout and positioning. All right, starting with section 1, web skeleton, HTML basics. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact relationship between these two languages. Think of HTML as the structural foundation, right? It's the steel rebar, the concrete walls, the actual skeleton of a body. Because without it, you really just have an empty void. CSS, on the other hand, well, that's the skin. It's the makeup, the paint, the interior design. Without CSS, a web page is just a raw, completely unstyled list of text and links. You really need both of them working together to create a complete, living digital product. Now, when you first start writing your HTML skeleton, there's one absolutely critical line of code you must never forget: the doc type. This is an essential instruction that goes at the very, very top of your document. If you forget it, the web browser gets confused and falls back into what is literally called quarks mode. And trust me, you do not want quarks mode. It interprets your code using these outdated legacy rules, and it can completely break your carefully crafted layout. Always, always tell the browser to use standard mode. Okay, so once you're safely in standard mode, you need to structure your text using a really strict hierarchical tree of headings. You've got levels H1 through H6. It helps to think of your web page like a book. The H1, that's the main title of the book. And you'd never have two main titles on a book cover, right? Therefore, you should only have one H1 tag per page. This is absolutely crucial for search engines to actually understand your site. H2s are your chapter titles, H3s are the stories within those chapters, and it just cascades down from there. Actually, professional design marketplaces will outright reject your website templates if this heading tree is out of order. It's really that important. Moving right along to section 2, styling the web, CSS rules. So to get into the styling, we really need to understand how the browser reads a CSS command. Let's break down the anatomy of a CSS rule. It always starts with a selector. That's simply the HTML element you want to target, like a paragraph or a heading. Next comes the declaration block, which is all wrapped up in curly braces. Inside those braces, you have a property, meaning what you actually want to change, like color, followed by a colon, and then the value, like red. It's a highly logical, incredibly precise language once you get the hang of it. But, where do you actually put these rules? Well, you have 3 options. You can write CSS inline, directly on the HTML tag. Now, this is incredibly strong and it overrides everything else, but it's an absolute nightmare for developers to maintain on large corporate projects. Then you can put it internal in the head tag, which, is okay for single pages. But the professional standard is the external CSS file. So the crucial point is this: by keeping your HTML structure in one file and your CSS styling in a completely separate file, your code remains clean, it's easily updatable, and it's highly professional. Which brings us to section 3, fonts and backgrounds in design. When it comes to color, developers don't just rely on basic words like red or blue. No way, you have precise mathematical control. You can use RGB, mixing red, green, and blue values on a scale from 0 to 255. Want to make it transparent? Just add an alpha channel, that's RGBA, to set the opacity anywhere from 0 to 1. Or you can use hex codes, which are these sleek 6-character alphanumeric codes that give you literally millions of color combinations. And when applying images to backgrounds, we use the background repeat property. This lets you precisely control whether that image tiles horizontally on the x-axis, vertically on the y-axis, or hey, maybe you don't want it to repeat at all. And here's a fun magic number for you: 16. Did you know that 16 pixels is the global default font size for almost every single web browser? So when developers use dynamic sizing units like rem or em, they're actually calculating mathematically right from this root number of 16. 2rem, for example, simply means 2 times 16, resulting in a 32-pixel font. Doing this makes designing for mobile screens infinitely easier, for sure. Another incredible time saver in CSS is the concept of inheritance. Instead of sitting there styling 100 individual paragraphs, you just apply a style to their parent container. So step 1, you set the font color on the parent. Step 2, you nest child elements inside that parent. And step 3, those children automatically inherit the parent's color. The styles cascade down automatically, saving you from writing endless lines of repetitive code. Well, unless, of course, you choose to specifically overwrite it for a single child. All right, let's jump to section 4, writing code smartly and professionally. Now, when you create custom names for your CSS selectors, there are a few professional naming conventions you should really be following. You might use camel case, where the first word is lowercase and the next word is capitalized. Or maybe Pascal case, where every single word is capitalized. Or my personal favorite, kebab case, where the words are simply separated by dashes. But look at that final rule on the screen. Never use spaces in class or ID names. Seriously, if you write my space box, the browser is going to think you're trying to style two completely separate elements, and it will break your design entirely. Let's move to and see how this builds into an even smarter workflow, grouping selectors. Imagine you have a heading 1, a heading 2, and a paragraph, and they all need the exact same margin and padding. Instead of writing the same rule 3 separate times, which is super frustrating, you simply separate the selectors with a comma. In one swift move, you apply those shared properties globally. And if you need to change the padding later, you only have to update it in one single place. That, my friends, is the definition of clean code. Finally, Section 5, Mastering Element Layout and Positioning. So here's the million-dollar question for any web developer. How do we perfectly position and space elements side by side without our entire design just completely collapsing like a house of cards? Let's look at a classic solution to this exact problem. Step 1 to understand is that web elements naturally want to stack vertically, right? Just one on top of the other. Step 2, to get them to sit side by side, developers traditionally apply the float property, telling the element to float to the left or the right. But this causes a massive issue. The parent container suddenly doesn't recognize their height anymore, and it just collapses into itself. That brings us to step 3. You absolutely must apply the clear property to an element underneath to reset the layout and restore that parent container's height. Failing to clear your floats is a notorious layout-breaking rookie mistake. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the calc function. When you're building complex grids and you need exact spacing, guessing percentages just isn't going to cut it. The calc function lets you perform dynamic math directly right there in the CSS. You can literally tell the browser to make a box, say, 100% wide minus 90 pixels of margin, divided by 5. And the browser just does the math in real time, no matter how the user resizes their screen. It is an absolute powerhouse. To really separate the amateur sites from the professional ones, you need to master these finishing touches that heavily improve user experience. If you have text that's just too long for a box, use text overflow, ellipsis, to elegantly cut it off with those 3 little dots. If a user pastes a massive web link that threatens to break your layout, WordBreak will force it to safely wrap to the next line. You can use opacity to dim entire elements to draw attention elsewhere, and hey, don't forget the cursor property. Changing the mouse pointer from a standard arrow to a grab hand or a pointing finger instinctively tells the user exactly how they should interact with your design. Finally, when you need absolute precision, you use the position property. By setting an element to position relative, you can nudge it using exact x and y coordinates. The real beauty of relative positioning is that the element moves from its original starting place, but none of the surrounding elements on the page move at all. It's like the ultimate tool for safely and precisely tweaking your design without causing some massive chain reaction of broken layouts. And that brings us to the end of our journey today. You've seen the raw structural power of the HTML skeleton, and you've explored the intricate visual control of the CSS skin. You have the building blocks, you have the math, and you have the logic. So what does this all mean? Well, the only question left for you is, now that you understand this, what kind of digital body are you going to bring to life? Get out there, start experimenting, and start building.